The blood on Adelaide Morgan's dress had dried to a rusty brown, and no amount of scrubbing in the creek behind the boarding house could wash away the stain or the memory of how it got there. She stood at the base of the wooden church steps in Red River, New Mexico Territory, on a sweltering Sunday morning in July of 1878, watching the respectable people of the town file inside for services. The women wore clean pressed dresses in modest colors, their hair pinned neatly beneath bonnets, their faces scrubbed and pious. The men walked beside them in their Sunday best, boots polished, hats in hand as they entered the Lord's house. Adelaide clutched her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders despite the heat, trying to cover the stains she knew everyone could see, even though she had changed into her only other dress. The stains were not just on fabric but on her very soul, or so she believed. 3 days ago, she had held her dying father in her arms as he bled out from a gunshot wound in the street outside the Silver Star Saloon. He had been drinking, as he often did since her mother passed 2 years prior, and had gotten into an argument over a card game. The other man had drawn faster. Adelaide had heard the shots from their small rented room above the millinery shop, and had run into the street in time to watch the light fade from her father's eyes. She had knelt in the dirt and the blood, cradling him, screaming for help that came too late. The sheriff had ruled it a fair fight, and the other man had ridden out of town the next morning without consequence. Now Adelaide was alone in the world at 22 years old, with no family, no money beyond the few dollars hidden in her mattress, and a reputation that had suffered from her father's drinking and gambling. The good people of Red River had always looked at the Morgans with a mixture of pity and disdain. Her father had been a talented carpenter before the drink took him, but in recent years he had become known as a nuisance, a sad drunk who could not hold a job. By extension, Adelaide had become someone to avoid, someone whose presence reminded others of what happened when respectability slipped away. She wanted to pray. She needed to pray. The weight of grief and loneliness pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe, and she thought perhaps God might offer some comfort, some sign that she was not completely abandoned in this world. But as she stood at those steps, watching the respectable families enter, she could not make her feet move. She was too ashamed, too aware of the whispers that would follow her down the aisle, too conscious of the sidelong glances and the way women would pull their children closer as she passed. "It is not going to get any easier the longer you stand here," a deep voice said from behind her. Adelaide turned to find a tall man standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that fell almost to his shoulders and eyes the color of creek water in summer, a pale green-brown that seemed to see right through her defenses. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, denim trousers and a worn shirt, a bandana around his neck, but everything was clean and his boots, though dusty, were well maintained. A gun belt hung at his hip, but that was common enough in these parts. "I am sorry," Adelaide said, confused by his presence and his words. "I have been watching you stand here for the past 10 minutes, he said, his voice gentle despite its depth. "You want to go inside, but something is stopping you." Adelaide felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That is none of your concern, sir." "You are right, it is not," he agreed, stepping closer. "But I know what it feels like to think you do not belong somewhere, to feel like everyone is watching and judging. I know what it is like to carry shame that is not entirely your own." She studied him more carefully. There was something in his eyes, an understanding that seemed genuine. "I do not know you, Zachary Grantham," he said, offering a small bow of his head. "I have been working at the Double R Ranch about 15 miles outside of town. I come into Red River once a month for supplies and services." Services, Adelaide repeated, glancing at the church. You are here for church. I am, he confirmed. And so are you, or you want to be, so why do not we walk in together? Adelaide shook her head quickly. You do not understand. People here, they know me, they know my father, what happened. I should not be here. Your father was Thomas Morgan, Zachary said quietly. I heard about what happened. I am sorry for your loss. The unexpected kindness nearly undid her. Adelaide felt tears burn behind her eyes, and she blinked rapidly, determined not to cry in front of this stranger. Thank you, but that does not change anything. The people in this town, they think were trash. My father drank himself to death over a card game. I have no money, no prospects, no family. I do not belong in there with decent people. Zachary was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that surprised her. My father was hanged for horse theft when I was 12 years old. Adelaide's eyes widened, and she met his gaze, seeing the old pain there, buried but not forgotten. He was guilty, Zachary continued. He stole 3 horses from a ranch in Texas because he wanted to sell them and buy more whiskey. He was a drunk and a thief, and he left my mother and me with nothing but his shame. My mother worked herself to death in a laundry house in San Antonio, and I grew up as the son of a hanged man. People crossed the street to avoid me. They assumed I would turn out just like him. I am sorry, Adelaide whispered, meaning it. The point is, Zachary said, I understand what it is like to carry someone else's sins on your shoulders, but here is what I learned after years of anger and shame. You are not your father. His choices do not define you, and God does not care what the good people of Red River think. If you want to pray, if you need to pray, then you have every right to walk through those doors. They will stare, Adelaide said, her voice small. Let them stare, Zachary said firmly. Walk in with me. If they want to judge, they can judge us both. Adelaide looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and determination. This man, this stranger, was offering her something no one else in Red River had offered in years: simple human dignity and solidarity. She did not know why he was being kind, what he hoped to gain, but in that moment she was too tired and too grief-stricken to question it. Why would you do this? She asked. You do not know me. Associating with me will not do you any favors in this town. Zachary smiled then, a slow, warm smile that transformed his serious face. Because 3 years ago, a preacher in San Antonio saw me standing outside his church, just like you are now, too ashamed to go inside. He came out, put his hand on my shoulder and said, Son, you are welcome here. He walked me inside and sat beside me, and for the first time in years I felt like maybe I was not beyond redemption. I figure I owe it to pass that kindness along. Adelaide felt something crack open inside her chest, some hard shell she had built around her heart to protect herself from more hurt. I do not even know you, she repeated, but this time it was less a protest and more a wonder. Then we will get to know each other, Zachary said simply. He offered her his arm. What do you say, Miss Morgan? Will you walk in with me? Adelaide hesitated for only a moment longer, and then she placed her hand on his arm. His strength seemed to flow into her, steadying her shaking legs. Together, they climbed the steps of the church. As they entered through the doors, Adelaide felt every eye in the building turn toward them. The congregation was settling into the pews, and the sudden hush that fell over the room was deafening. She recognized faces. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store, Mr. Walsh, the banker, the Schmidt family who owned the feed lot, and dozens of others. She saw surprise, curiosity, and yes, judgment in their expressions. Zachary kept his hand over hers where it rested on his arm, a steady, warm pressure that kept her moving forward. He guided her to a pew about halfway down the aisle, and they sat together. Adelaide kept her eyes forward, her back straight, even as she felt the weight of all those stares. The preacher, Reverend Daniels, an older man with white hair and a kind face, seemed surprised to see her but not displeased. He offered her a small nod before beginning the service. Adelaide barely heard the hymns or the sermon. She was too aware of Zachary beside her, his solid presence, and the way he shared his hymnal with her without hesitation. She was aware of the whispers that rustled through the congregation like wind through grass, but with Zachary there, they seemed less sharp, less able to wound her. When the service ended, several people approached. Adelaide braced herself for criticism or cruel words, but instead found a few genuinely sympathetic faces. Mrs. Martha Patterson, an older widow who lived on the edge of town, touched Adelaide's hand. "I was sorry to hear about your father, dear. Thomas was a good man before the grief took him. I remember when he built the gazebo in the town square. Such beautiful work." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," Adelaide said, her throat tight. Mr. Jacobson, who owned the dry goods store, nodded to her. "If you need help with arrangements or anything else, you let us know." It was not everyone, and she could still feel the cold disapproval from many quarters, but it was more kindness than she had expected. And through it all, Zachary remained at her side, a quiet, steady presence. When they finally emerged from the church into the bright sunlight, Adelaide felt simultaneously exhausted and lighter than she had in days. "Thank you," she said to Zachary, meaning it with her whole heart. "I could not have done that alone." "You are stronger than you think," he replied. "But everyone needs someone in their corner sometimes." They stood on the church steps, neither quite ready to part ways. Adelaide realized she did not want him to leave, this stranger who had shown her such unexpected kindness. "Can I buy you lunch?" Zachary asked, as if reading her thoughts. "There is a decent restaurant at the hotel, nothing fancy, but the food is good." Adelaide thought of her dwindling funds and shook her head. "I should not spend the money. My treat," Zachary said firmly. "Please. I eat alone most Sundays and I would appreciate the company." She should refuse. She should protect what little reputation she had left. But looking into his honest eyes, Adelaide found herself nodding. "All right, thank you." The hotel restaurant was quiet, most of the Sunday crowd still at home with their families. Zachary guided her to a table by the window and pulled out her chair before taking his own seat. It was such a simple gesture of respect, but it made Adelaide want to cry. She could not remember the last time a man had treated her with such courtesy. They ordered roast chicken with potatoes and vegetables, and as they waited for the food, an awkward silence fell between them. Adelaide fidgeted with her napkin, unsure what to say to this man who had so dramatically entered her life just an hour ago. "How long have you been working at the Double R?" she asked finally, grasping for safe conversation. "About 2 years," Zachary replied. "I came up from Texas looking for work and a fresh start. The foreman, Jack Reynolds, took a chance on me even though I did not have much experience. I have been learning the trade, working with the cattle, mending fences, all of it." "You like it?" Adelaide asked. Zachary considered the question. "I do. It is honest work, hard work, and at the end of the day I am too tired to think too much. The land here is beautiful, different from Texas but beautiful in its own way. And the other men, they do not care about my past. They judge me on how well I can rope a steer or sit a horse, nothing else." "That must be nice," Adelaide said wistfully, "to be somewhere no one knows your history." "Is that what you want?" Zachary asked gently. "To leave Red River?" Adelaide was quiet as their food arrived. Once the server left, she picked up her fork but did not eat right away. "I do not know what I want anymore. A week ago I had my father. He was not perfect, but he was family, he was all I had. Now I am alone. I have been working at the millinery shop doing alterations and repairs, but it barely pays enough for my room. Mrs. Cassidy, who owns the shop, she is kind, but she cannot afford to pay me more. And I know there are people in town who think I should just leave, that I am a reminder of something unpleasant. Where would you go? Zachary asked, beginning to eat. I do not know, Adelaide admitted. I have no family anywhere else. I thought maybe Santa Fe or Albuquerque, somewhere bigger where I could find work, but I do not have enough money for the stagecoach and I know no one there. It seems foolish to go somewhere completely unknown with no prospects. It is not foolish to want a better life, Zachary said. But running away from shame does not always work. Sometimes it follows you. Other times, you find that the shame was never really yours to carry in the first place. Adelaide finally took a bite of her chicken, chewing thoughtfully. You sound like you have experience with that. I do, Zachary confirmed. I ran from San Antonio thinking that if I could just get far enough away, I could outrun being the son of a hanged thief. But eventually I realized that the shame was my own creation, or rather, I was letting other people's judgment create it for me. Once I decided that I was not going to be defined by my father's crimes, that I was going to make my own way and be my own man, things got easier. How did you decide that? Adelaide asked, genuinely curious. How did you just let go of the shame? Zachary leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant as he remembered. It was not one moment, it was gradual. But there was a day, about a year after I came to the Double R when I was in town getting supplies. A man recognized me, or rather, he recognized my name. He had known my father in Texas. He started telling everyone in the store about how my father was a drunk and a thief, how the hanging had been too good for him. I could feel everyone staring at me, waiting to see what I would do. What did you do? Adelaide asked, holding her breath. I looked him in the eye and I said, yes, my father was those things. He made terrible choices and he paid for them. But I am not him. I am Zachary Grantham and I work hard, I pay my debts, and I treat people with respect. If you want to judge me for his actions, that is your choice, but it does not change who I am. Then I paid for my supplies and walked out. Adelaide stared at him in admiration. That must have taken incredible courage. Zachary shrugged. It took being tired of carrying a burden that was not mine. After that, it got easier. Some people still judged me, but others saw me for who I was, not who my father had been. And the opinions of strangers matter less than I thought they did. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, and Adelaide felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It felt almost like hope. I wish I had your strength, she said quietly. You do, Zachary insisted. You walked into that church today knowing people would stare and judge. That took strength. I only did it because you were with me, Adelaide pointed out. This time, Zachary agreed. But next time maybe it will be a little easier, and the time after that, easier still. Eventually, you will not need anyone to walk in with you. You will know your own worth, regardless of what anyone else thinks. Adelaide wanted to believe him, but the weight of her grief and uncertainty was still so heavy. I do not know what happens now, she confessed. I have to sort out my father's affairs, what little there is to sort out. He owed back rent on our room. He had debts at the saloon. I do not even know if I will be able to pay for a proper burial. Zachary's expression softened with sympathy. Have you spoken to the sheriff or anyone about his belongings? The sheriff said my father had nothing of value, Adelaide said bitterly. His tools were sold years ago to pay off other debts. There was nothing in our room but clothes and a few personal items. I have maybe $30 to my name, and that will not last long. What about the millinery shop? Can you take on more hours? Adelaide shook her head. Mrs. Cassidy barely has enough work for me as it is. Red River is not a big enough town to support much business, and most women make their own hats or order them from catalogs. Zachary was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "The double R is looking for a cook. The old cook, Mr. Patterson, retired last month and went to live with his daughter in Denver. The foreman has been complaining that none of the ranch hands can cook worth a damn, and we have been taking turns making terrible meals." Adelaide blinked in surprise. "You think I could get a job at the ranch? Can you cook?" Zachary asked. "Yes," Adelaide said. "My mother taught me, and I have been cooking for my father and myself for years. I am not fancy, but I can make good basic meals." "That is all we need," Zachary said. "The job comes with room and board, a small cabin behind the main house, and a salary. It is not much, maybe $25 a month, but your expenses would be minimal since your housing and food would be covered." Adelaide's mind raced. It was not a fortune, but it would be steady work and a place to live. She could save money, build some security. And most importantly, it would be away from Red River and the constant judgment of people who had known her father. But doubt crept in almost immediately. Why would they hire me? They do not know me, and if they ask around town about me, they will hear about my father. Jack Reynolds judges people by their work, not their family history, Zachary said firmly. "I will vouch for you. Tell him you are a hard worker and a good cook, and that is all he will care about." "You barely know me," Adelaide protested. "Why would you risk your own reputation by vouching for me?" Zachary met her eyes across the table, and something passed between them, a connection that was deeper than logic or reason. "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you have courage. I know you have suffered loss and shame, and you are still standing. I know you want to build a better life. That is enough for me." Adelaide felt tears threaten again, but this time they were different, tears of gratitude and relief rather than grief and shame. "I do not know how to thank you." "Say yes," Zachary replied. "Come out to the ranch tomorrow and meet Jack. If he agrees to hire you, you can start as soon as you are ready." It was happening so fast, this sudden turn in her fortunes. Part of Adelaide wanted to be cautious, to question Zachary's motives and protect herself from disappointment. But a larger part of her, the part that had been drowning in despair just this morning, grabbed onto this lifeline with both hands. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Yes, I will come meet him." Zachary's smile was brilliant, transforming his whole face. "Good, I will come by in the morning, around 8. We can ride out together." "I do not have a horse," Adelaide said, suddenly worried about this practical detail. "You can ride with me," Zachary said easily. "It is not far, just a couple of hours." The thought of riding with him, of being that close to him, made Adelaide's cheeks warm, but she nodded. "All right." They finished their meal, the conversation turning to lighter topics. Zachary told her about the ranch, the other men who worked there, the landscape and the work. Adelaide found herself relaxing, even laughing at some of his stories about ranch life and the mishaps of inexperienced cowboys. When they finally left the restaurant, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. Zachary walked her back to the boarding house where she rented her small room. "Thank you for today," Adelaide said as they stood outside the weathered building. "For everything. You changed my life in the span of a few hours." "We will see how it turns out first," Zachary said with a small smile, "but I have a good feeling about this." "Me too," Adelaide admitted, and it was true. For the first time in days, possibly years, she felt something other than dread when she thought about the future. "Get some rest," Zachary advised. "I will see you in the morning." Adelaide watched him walk away, his long stride carrying him down the dusty street until he disappeared around a corner. Then she went inside, climbed the narrow stairs to her tiny room, and sat on the edge of her bed. The room still held traces of her father. His coat hung on a peg by the door. His spare boots sat in the corner. His shaving kit lay on the small table by the window. Adelaide would have to pack it all up, decide what to keep and what to discard. She would have to face his debts and his legacy. But somehow, with the promise of a new job and a fresh start, and with the memory of Zachary's kind eyes and steady voice, it all seemed manageable. She was not alone anymore, not completely. Someone had reached out a hand to her, had seen her as a person worthy of help and respect. Adelaide lay back on the bed and closed her eyes, letting herself imagine what life might be like at the Double R Ranch. She pictured herself in a kitchen, preparing meals for the ranch hands, taking pride in her work. She imagined earning her own money, building her own life on her own terms. And if she was honest, she also imagined seeing Zachary every day, hearing his voice, being in his presence. She barely knew him, but he had already changed something fundamental inside her. He had given her hope, and that was more valuable than gold. The next morning, Adelaide was awake before dawn. She had barely slept, too nervous and excited about what the day might bring. She packed her few belongings into the worn carpet bag that had been her mother's, leaving out only the dress she would wear and the items she would need immediately. If she got the job, she could come back for the rest. If she did not, well, at least she would have tried. She used some of her precious remaining money to pay off her back rent to Mrs. Henley, the boarding house owner. The older woman was surprised but pleased. "Are you leaving us, Adelaide?" she asked, counting the bills. "I have a chance at a job," Adelaide explained. "At her ranch outside of town. If it works out, I will not be needing the room anymore." Mrs. Henley studied her with shrewd eyes. "This would not have anything to do with that handsome cowboy you were seen with yesterday, would it? The one who walked you into church." Adelaide felt her cheeks heat. "He is helping me, that is all." Hum," Mrs. Henley said knowingly. "Well, good luck to you, dear. You deserve something good after all you have been through." The unexpected kindness made Adelaide's throat tight. "Thank you, Mrs. Henley." At precisely 8 o'clock, Adelaide heard the sound of horse hooves outside. She grabbed her carpetbag and hurried down the stairs and out the front door. Zachary sat astride a beautiful bay gelding, and he smiled when he saw her. He dismounted in one fluid motion and took her bag, securing it behind his saddle. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as I will ever be," Adelaide replied, trying to calm her nerves. Zachary mounted first, then reached down to help her up. Adelaide placed her foot on top of his boot in the stirrup and grasped his hand. He pulled her up easily, and she settled behind him on the horse, her arms wrapping around his waist to keep her balance. The closeness was startling. She could feel the warmth of his body, the solid muscle of his back against her chest, smell the clean scent of soap and leather and something that was uniquely him. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she hoped he could not feel it. "All set?" Zachary asked, his voice rumbling through his chest. "Yes," Adelaide managed. They set off at an easy pace, heading out of Red River toward the open country beyond. The morning air was cool and fresh, the sky a brilliant blue broken only by a few wispy clouds. As they left the town behind, Adelaide felt some of the tension she had been carrying begin to ease. The landscape opened up before them, rolling hills covered in scrub grass and dotted with juniper trees and piñon pines. In the distance, mountains rose against the horizon, their peaks still dusted with snow even in summer. It was beautiful and vast, and Adelaide felt small in the best possible way, like her problems were just a tiny part of a much larger world. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the occasional cry of a bird overhead. Adelaide became aware of how natural it felt to be here like this, holding on to Zachary as they moved through the landscape together. It should have felt awkward or presumptuous, but instead it felt right. "Tell me about Jack Reynolds," Adelaide said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "What is he like?" "Fair," Zachary replied. "Tough but fair. He has been foreman at the Double R for nearly 10 years. The owner, Mr. Richard Daniels, lives in Santa Fe and only comes out to the ranch a few times a year, so Jack runs the day-to-day operations. He cares about the ranch and the cattle, but he cares about his men too. He works hard and expects everyone else to do the same, but he is not cruel or unreasonable." "Is he married?" Adelaide asked, wondering if there would be another woman at the ranch. "No, he never married. He is maybe 45 or so, dedicated to the ranch. There is a woman in town he calls on sometimes, but he seems content with his life as it is." "And the other men, how many are there?" "6 of us including me," Zachary said. "There is Pete, he is the oldest, maybe 50, been a cowboy his whole life. Then there is Sam and Willie, they are brothers, both in their 30s. Good men, hard workers. There is Carlos, he is from Mexico originally, came up here about 5 years ago. Best rider I have ever seen. And then there is Danny, he is young, just turned 19, still learning but eager." "Will they be all right with having a woman around?" Adelaide asked, voicing one of her worries. Zachary was quiet for a moment. "I think so. Most of them are decent men. They might be a bit rough around the edges, but they are not mean. And honestly, they will be so happy to have good food again that they will not care who is cooking it." Adelaide managed a small laugh. "I hope you are right." "I am," Zachary said confidently. "And if anyone gives you trouble, they will answer to me." The protectiveness in his voice sent a warm flutter through Adelaide's stomach. She tightened her arms around him slightly. A wordless thank you. They rode for another hour before the ranch buildings came into view. The Double R was more extensive than Adelaide had imagined. There was a large main house built of adobe and wood, several barns and outbuildings, a series of corrals holding horses and cattle, and a few smaller structures that she assumed were bunkhouses or storage sheds. Zachary guided the horse toward the main house, and as they approached, a man emerged from one of the barns. He was tall and lean with a weathered face and gray threading through his dark hair. He wore a leather vest over a work shirt and moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew his domain. "Morning, Zach," the man called out. "Who is your passenger?" Zachary dismounted and then helped Adelaide down. Her legs were a bit shaky from the long ride, and she was grateful for his steadying hand on her elbow. "Jack, this is Miss Adelaide Morgan," Zachary said. "Adelaide, this is Jack Reynolds, the foreman I told you about." Jack approached and tipped his hat politely. "Miss Morgan, what brings you out to the Double R?" Adelaide gathered her courage. "Mr. Reynolds, I understand you are looking for a cook. I would like to apply for the position." Jack's eyebrows rose slightly and he glanced at Zachary, who gave a small nod. "Is that so? What is your experience?" "I have been cooking for my family for years, sir," Adelaide said, keeping her voice steady. "I know how to prepare basic meals, bread, stews, roasts. I can stretch supplies and plan meals for large groups. I am a hard worker and I learn quickly." "She is from Red River," Zachary added. "Her father passed recently and she is looking for a fresh start." Jack studied Adelaide with sharp eyes, and she forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. She knew he was assessing her, trying to determine if she would be worth the trouble of having a woman on a ranch full of men. "Can you cook for 8 men, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week?" Jack asked bluntly. "Yes, sir," Adelaide replied without hesitation. "The hours are long. You would be up before dawn to make breakfast, and you would not be done cleaning up from supper until after dark. You would also be responsible for keeping the kitchen and dining area clean, doing some basic laundry for the kitchen linens, and managing the food supplies and making lists for what we need from town. I understand, Adelaide said. I am not afraid of hard work. Jack looked at Zachary again. You vouch for her. I do, Zachary said firmly. Jack rubbed his jaw, thinking. Then he said, All right, Miss Morgan, I will give you a trial period. 1 month. If your cooking is good and you can handle the work and the men, the job is yours permanent. If not, no hard feelings, but you will need to find something else. The pay is $25 a month plus room and board. You get Sundays off after lunch is served, and you can go into town once a month if you need supplies or want to attend services. Does that sound fair? Adelaide felt a surge of relief and excitement so strong she nearly swayed. Yes, sir, that sounds very fair, thank you. Do not thank me yet, Jack said with a wry smile. Wait until you see the state of that kitchen. Old Patterson was a good man, but he was not exactly tidy, and the boys who have been attempting to cook since he left have made a disaster of things. I am sure I can manage, Adelaide said. Your cabin is around back of the main house, Jack said. It is small but private. Zach, why do not you show her while I go tell the men we finally have a proper cook again? They will be pleased. Zachary nodded and picked up Adelaide's carpetbag. This way. Adelaide followed him around the side of the main house to a small adobe structure with a wooden door and 2 windows. It was indeed small, just 1 room from what she could see, but it looked sturdy and well maintained. Zachary opened the door and stepped aside to let her enter first. The cabin was simple but clean. There was a narrow bed with a straw mattress, a small table and chair, a trunk for storage, and a fireplace for heat during the cold months. 1 window looked out toward the main house, the other toward the open range beyond. It is not much, Zachary said, setting her bag on the table. But it is private and safe. It is perfect, Adelaide said honestly. After sharing a cramped room with her father and living in a boarding house where she could hear every sound through the thin walls, this small cabin felt like a palace. It was hers, a space where she could close the door and be alone, where she could start building a new life. The kitchen is in the main house, Zachary explained. There is a dining room for meals. The men eat together, all of us including Jack. We try to have breakfast at 6, lunch at noon, and supper at 6 in the evening, but the schedule can be flexible depending on the work that needs doing. Adelaide nodded, taking it all in. When do I start? Might as well be tonight, Zachary said. I am sure the men would appreciate a decent supper after weeks of our attempts at cooking. Then I should see the kitchen and take stock of what supplies we have, Adelaide said, already mentally planning what she could make with what was likely available. Zachary led her back to the main house and into the kitchen. Adelaide had to suppress a gasp at the state of it. Jack had been kind in his description. Pots and pans were piled haphazardly in the dry sink, crusted with old food. The work table was covered in spills and crumbs. The cupboard stood open, revealing a disorganized mess of supplies. The floor needed sweeping, and the whole room had the slightly sour smell of a space that had not been properly cleaned in too long. But underneath the mess, Adelaide could see it was a good kitchen. There was a large iron stove, plenty of counter space, a pump for water right at the sink, and generous storage. With some hard work, it could be a pleasant place to work. I know it looks bad, Zachary said apologetically. It is nothing some elbow grease cannot fix, Adelaide said, already rolling up her sleeves. Can you help me heat some water? I need to clean before I can even think about cooking. Zachary grinned. Jack was right to hire you. You are already taking charge. For the next several hours, Adelaide worked harder than she had in a long time. She heated water and scrubbed every pot and pan until they shone. She washed the work table, the counters, and the shelves. She swept and scrubbed the floor. She organized the cupboards, taking inventory of what supplies were available. Zachary helped for the first hour, hauling water and carrying out trash, but then Jack called him away for work. Adelaide did not mind. She was in her element, bringing order to chaos, making the space her own. By mid-afternoon, the kitchen was clean and organized. Adelaide found flour, lard, salt, baking powder, and other basic supplies. There was a fair stock of dried beans, rice, and preserved vegetables. In the cold cellar, she found potatoes, onions, and a few carrots. There was a decent supply of salt pork and some dried beef. It was not fancy, but it was enough. Adelaide set to work making biscuits and a large pot of bean and salt pork soup, thick and hearty. She found some dried herbs and added them for flavor. She made a large pot of coffee and set the table in the adjacent dining room. As the sun began to set, she heard the sound of men returning from their day's work. Voices and laughter drifted in from outside, and then boots on the porch. Adelaide smoothed her apron and squared her shoulders, ready to meet the crew. The men filed into the dining room and stopped short at the sight of her. There was a moment of surprised silence, and then Jack stepped forward. "Boys, this is Miss Adelaide Morgan, our new cook." "Miss Morgan, this motley crew are the hands of the double R." Adelaide nodded politely as Jack pointed out each man. Pete was indeed older, with a grizzled beard and kind eyes. Sam and Willie were clearly brothers, both stocky and fair-haired. Carlos was lean and graceful, with dark eyes and a shy smile. Danny was the youngest, with a shock of red hair and a face full of freckles. "Pleased to meet you all," Adelaide said. "Supper is ready. Please sit down." The men needed no further invitation. They took their seats, and Adelaide brought out the pot of soup and a basket of biscuits. She poured coffee and then stepped back, nervous as they took their first bites. The silence that fell was different this time. Then Willie groaned, "Lord have mercy, this is the best thing I have eaten in a month." "These biscuits are perfect," Pete said, reaching for a third one. "You are an angel, Miss Morgan," Danny said enthusiastically. "An honest-to-God angel." Even Carlos, who had been quiet and watchful, nodded his approval. "My bueno, señorita." Adelaide felt warmth spread through her chest. "I am glad you like it. I will try to have more variety in the coming days once I see what we have to work with." "Variety," Sam said. "Madam, if you can keep making food this good, you can cook the same thing every night and we would be happy." Zachary caught her eye from across the table and gave her a smile that made her heart skip. She smiled back, feeling truly happy for the first time in longer than she could remember. The days began to blur together in a pleasant rhythm. Adelaide rose before dawn and started the fire in the kitchen stove. She made coffee, enough for 8 men who did hard physical labor all day. She cooked breakfast, usually biscuits and gravy, or bacon and eggs, or porridge with molasses. The men ate quickly and headed out to their work, leaving her to clean up and begin preparations for lunch. Midday meals were simpler, usually soup or sandwiches, something the men could eat quickly before returning to their tasks. Adelaide used the afternoon to prepare supper, which was the largest meal of the day. She made stews, roasts, fried chicken, and anything else she could manage with the available supplies. She learned to bake bread and pies. She made extra when she could, knowing the men had hearty appetites. The work was exhausting but satisfying. Adelaide fell into bed each night bone-tired but content. She was earning her keep, building a life with her own 2 hands. The men treated her with respect, even a kind of reverence. They appreciated her cooking and showed it by eating every bite and thanking her after each meal. Zachary became a regular presence in her days. He often stopped by the kitchen in the morning to grab an extra cup of coffee before heading out. He helped her carry heavy pots or bags of supplies without being asked. He made her laugh with stories of the day's mishaps and adventures. Adelaide found herself watching for him, listening for his voice, feeling a flutter of excitement whenever he appeared. She told herself it was just gratitude, just appreciation for his kindness. But in her quieter moments, alone in her cabin at night, she admitted the truth. She was falling for him. It had only been 2 weeks since that Sunday morning when he had found her standing outside the church, but it felt like she had known him much longer. There was an ease between them, a comfort that usually took years to develop. They could talk for hours about everything and nothing, or they could work in companionable silence, and it felt just as natural. One evening after supper, Adelaide was washing dishes when Zachary appeared with a dish towel. "Let me help," he said. "You do not have to do that," Adelaide protested. "You have been working all day." "So have you," Zachary pointed out. "And besides, I want to." They worked side by side, Adelaide washing and Zachary drying. The kitchen was warm from the stove and quiet, the other men having retired to the bunkhouse to play cards or rest. "You have been here 2 weeks now," Zachary said. "How are you feeling about the job?" "I love it," Adelaide said honestly. "The work is hard, but it is mine. I feel useful, valued, and the men are kind. I was worried about being the only woman, but they have been nothing but respectful." "They know better than to be otherwise," Zachary said with a slight edge to his voice. "I made it clear that you are to be treated like a lady." Adelaide glanced at him, surprised by the protectiveness in his tone. "You did?" "Of course I did," Zachary said, meeting her eyes. "I brought you here. You are under my protection." The words sent a shiver through Adelaide that had nothing to do with cold. "I appreciate that." They finished the dishes in silence, but it was a charged silence now, full of unspoken things. When the last pot was dried and put away, Zachary hung up the dish towel and turned to Adelaide. "Would you like to take a walk?" he asked. "The evening is nice, and you have been cooped up in this kitchen all day." Adelaide knew she should probably say no. She should maintain proper boundaries, protect her reputation and her heart. But looking into Zachary's eyes, she found herself nodding. "I would like that." They walked out into the warm evening air. The sun had set, leaving the sky painted in shades of purple and orange. Stars were beginning to emerge, scattered across the darkening sky like diamonds. They walked in silence at first, their shoulders almost touching, away from the buildings and toward the open range. "It is beautiful here," Adelaide said quietly. "I never appreciated how beautiful the land is when I was stuck in town, worried about my father and what people thought of us." "There is a freedom in wide open spaces," Zachary agreed. "It makes your problems seem smaller somehow." "You still think about your father?" Adelaide asked, then immediately worried she had overstepped. "I am sorry, that is too personal." "No, it is all right," Zachary said. "I do think about him sometimes. Mostly I wonder who he might have been if the drink had not taken him. My mother used to tell me that he was different when they first married, that he was kind and hardworking. But something broke in him, some disappointment or pain he could not get past, and he turned to whiskey to numb it. By the time I was old enough to remember him clearly, he was already too far gone." "My father was the same," Adelaide said softly. "After my mother died, he just gave up. She was his anchor, the thing that kept him steady, and without her, he did not know how to be. I tried, but I could not be enough to save him." Zachary stopped walking and turned to face her. "It was not your job to save him, Adelaide. You were his daughter, not his keeper. He was a grown man who made his own choices." "I know that in my head," Adelaide said, tears burning behind her eyes. "But my heart still feels like I failed him somehow." "You did not fail," Zachary said firmly. He reached out and took her hands in his, the gesture shocking in its intimacy. "You loved him and you stood by him, even when it was hard, even when it cost you. That is all anyone could ask." Adelaide looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger and rougher than hers, calloused from hard work but gentle in their touch. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me," Adelaide said, finally looking up to meet his eyes. "For not seeing a drunk's daughter or someone to be pitied or avoided. For just seeing me." Zachary's expression softened, and he lifted one hand to cup her cheek. "I see you, Adelaide. I see a woman who is strong and brave and kind. I see someone who has been through hell but kept her goodness. I see someone beautiful inside and out." Adelaide's breath caught. "Zachary." "I know it has not been long," Zachary said, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I know we should probably take more time, be sensible, but I have to be honest with you. From that first moment outside the church, I felt something. A connection, a pull. I cannot stop thinking about you. I look for you all day, find excuses to be near you. I am falling for you, Adelaide, and I am not sure I want to stop myself." Adelaide felt tears spill over, but they were happy tears this time. "I feel it too," she confessed. "I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude, but it is more than that, so much more." Zachary smiled, that beautiful warm smile that transformed his whole face. "Can I court you properly? I know we are doing this backwards, living in the same place and seeing each other every day, but I want to do this right. I want to take you on walks and talk about our dreams. I want to bring you flowers and make you smile. I want to build something real with you." "Yes," Adelaide said without hesitation. "Yes, I would like that very much." Zachary pulled her into his arms then, and Adelaide went willingly, resting her head against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, and she felt safer than she had in years. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms under the emerging stars, and Adelaide felt the last of her shame and grief begin to fall away. She was not defined by her father's failures or the town's judgment. She was Adelaide Morgan, a woman building her own life, and she was falling in love with a good man who saw her true worth. The summer days passed in a golden haze of work and growing affection. True to his word, Zachary courted Adelaide properly. They took walks in the evenings after her work was done, talking about everything under the sun. He told her about his childhood in Texas, the good memories before his father's downfall. She told him about her mother, the gentle woman who had taught her to cook and sew and find beauty in small things. Zachary brought her wildflowers, handfuls of colorful blooms he picked on the range. Adelaide pressed some of them in an old book and kept them in her cabin, treasures that made her smile every time she saw them. The other ranch hands noticed the growing attachment between them and approved. Pete, who was something of a father figure to the younger men, told Adelaide one morning that he had not seen Zachary this happy since he had arrived at the ranch. "That boy had a hard life before he came here," Pete said, accepting a second cup of coffee. "He did not talk much, kept to himself." "But you brought him out of his shell, Miss Adelaide. You are good for him." "He is good for me too," Adelaide replied, feeling warmth spread through her chest. As August melted into September, the days began to cool slightly, though the sun was still strong. Adelaide's trial month ended, and Jack made it official. She was now the permanent cook of the Double R Ranch. She had proven herself a dozen times over, and the men would have revolted if Jack had even considered letting her go. Adelaide wrote a letter to Mrs. Cassidy in Red River, thanking her for the work at the millinery shop and explaining that she had found a position that better suited her needs. She sent it with one of the supply runs, along with a letter to Mrs. Henley, settling any final accounts. It felt good to close those chapters of her life cleanly, without loose ends. One Sunday in late September, Zachary asked Adelaide if she would like to ride into Red River with him for church services. Adelaide hesitated, the old anxiety creeping back. "I do not know," she said. "It has been 2 months. People might have forgotten about me, and I do not want to remind them." "Or," Zachary countered gently, "you could go back and show them that you are thriving, that you built yourself a good life. You do not owe them anything, but you might find some closure." Adelaide considered this. He was right, in a way. She had been hiding at the ranch, safe in her new life, but part of her was still that ashamed girl standing at the bottom of the church steps. Maybe it was time to face that girl and show her how far she had come. "All right," she agreed. "Let us go." They rode into Red River together, Adelaide once again seated behind Zachary on his horse. But this time, she was not running toward something in desperation. She was simply visiting, secure in the knowledge that she had somewhere to return to, a place where she belonged. The town looked the same, dusty and busy with Sunday morning activity. They arrived just before services began and walked into the church together. This time, Adelaide held her head high. She wore a dress she had made herself from fabric she had bought with her own earned money. Her hair was neatly pinned, and she knew she looked healthy and content. The congregation noticed them, of course. Heads turned and whispers rustled through the pews, but Adelaide also saw some genuinely pleased faces. Mrs. Patterson smiled and waved. Mr. Jacobson nodded respectfully. Even Mrs. Henderson from the general store looked approving. After services, several people approached them. Mrs. Patterson hugged Adelaide warmly. "I heard you were working at the Double R," she said. "I am so glad you found something good." "Thank you," Adelaide replied. "I am very happy there." "And is this young man courting you?" Mrs. Patterson asked with a knowing twinkle in her eye. Adelaide blushed, but Zachary answered readily, "I am, madam, with serious intentions." Mrs. Patterson beamed. "Good for you both. You deserve happiness, Adelaide, after everything." Not everyone was so welcoming. Adelaide saw Mrs. Henderson's sister watching them with disapproval, and she heard someone mutter something about "that drunk Morgan's girl," but it did not cut as deeply as it once would have. Those were the opinions of people who did not matter, who did not know her or her heart. Their judgment had no power over her anymore. As they prepared to leave, Reverend Daniels approached. "Miss Morgan, might I have a word?" Adelaide tensed slightly but nodded. Zachary squeezed her hand and stepped aside to give them privacy. "I wanted to tell you how sorry I was to hear about your father," Reverend Daniels said kindly. "I wish I had done more to reach out to him, to offer help. He was in pain and I failed him." "It was not your failure, Reverend," Adelaide said, echoing the words Zachary had said to her months ago. "My father made his choices. No one could have saved him but himself." "You are very wise for one so young," the Reverend said, "and very gracious. I also wanted to say that I am glad to see you found your way into the church, even if it took a good man to walk you through the door. You are always welcome here." "Thank you," Adelaide said, meaning it. "That means a great deal." The ride back to the ranch was peaceful. Adelaide felt lighter, as if she had set down a burden she did not realize she was still carrying. "How do you feel?" Zachary asked as they rode. "Free," Adelaide said simply. "Like I finally closed a door that needed closing." "Good," Zachary said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. As autumn progressed, the work on the ranch shifted with the seasons. The men prepared for the coming winter, repairing buildings and fences, moving cattle to better grazing areas, stocking up on supplies. Adelaide worked with Jack to plan what food stores they would need to get through the cold months, making lists and organizing the cold cellar. In the evenings, as the air grew crisp and cold, Adelaide and Zachary continued their walks, now bundled in coats. The landscape changed, the green fading to gold and brown. Flocks of birds flew south in great V formations overhead. The sunsets seemed more vivid, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. One evening in early October, as they walked beneath a sky full of stars, Zachary stopped and turned to Adelaide. "I have something I need to ask you," he said, his voice serious. Adelaide felt her heart begin to race. "What is it?" Zachary took both her hands in his. "I know we have only known each other for a few months. I know that by some measures we should wait longer, be more sensible. But Adelaide, I love you. I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you hum while you cook, and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love your determination and your grace. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Adelaide's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "Then marry me," Zachary said, his voice rough with emotion. "Be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy, building a life with you, giving you all the love and respect you deserve." Adelaide's tears spilled over, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Zachary pulled her into his arms and kissed her for the first time. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Adelaide felt like her heart might burst from happiness. This man, this good, kind man who had seen her at her lowest and offered her a hand up, who had believed in her when she could not believe in herself, loved her. And she loved him with everything she had. They were married on a crisp November morning in the church in Red River. Adelaide wore a simple but beautiful dress of ivory cotton that she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Zachary wore his best clothes, and he looked so handsome that Adelaide could hardly breathe when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. Jack gave her away, standing in for the father she no longer had. The ranch hands all attended, scrubbed and dressed in their Sunday best. Mrs. Patterson and a few other kind folks from town came as well, bearing witness to the union. Reverend Daniels performed the ceremony, his voice warm and resonant as he spoke about love and commitment, about two people who had found each other against the odds and chosen to build a life together. When Zachary said his vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to stand by you in good times and bad, to be your partner and your friend, to build a home with you and fill it with love." Adelaide's voice trembled with emotion as she spoke her own vows. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to stand by you, to support your dreams and share your burdens, to be your wife in every way that matters." When Reverend Daniels pronounced them husband and wife, and Zachary kissed her before God and their friends, Adelaide felt a joy so complete and pure that she thought she might float away. The ranch hands had prepared a celebration back at the Double R. Someone had strung up lanterns, and there was music and dancing, and a feast that Adelaide had prepared in advance with help from a few women from town who had volunteered their time. As the evening wore on and the stars came out, Zachary pulled Adelaide into his arms for a dance. They swayed together to the music of a fiddle, lost in each other's eyes. "Happy Mrs. Grantham?" Zachary asked, using her new name for the first time. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Adelaide replied honestly. 4 months ago, I was standing outside a church, too ashamed to go inside, thinking my life was over. Now I am married to the most wonderful man I have ever known, with a job I love and a future full of possibilities. It feels like a dream." "It is not a dream," Zachary assured her, pulling her closer. "This is real. We are real. And this is just the beginning of our story. He was right. Their life together was just beginning, and it was more wonderful than Adelaide could have imagined. Jack gave them permission to build a larger cabin on the ranch property, and over the winter months, Zachary and the other men worked on it when weather permitted. By spring, Adelaide and Zachary had moved into a cozy two-room house with a proper kitchen and a bedroom, even a small parlor area. Adelaide continued her work as the ranch cook, but now Zachary was there every night when she finished, waiting to walk her home to their own place. They spent evenings together, talking and laughing, making plans for the future. They spoke of children someday, of growing old together, of building a legacy of love to replace the painful legacies they had each inherited. As the years passed, their life together deepened and grew richer. In the spring of 1880, Adelaide discovered she was expecting their first child. Zachary was overjoyed, already planning how he would teach his son or daughter to ride and rope, to appreciate the beauty of the land and the value of hard work. On a cold December morning, Adelaide gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after her father, giving that name a new legacy of hope instead of shame. Little Thomas had his father's eyes and his mother's determination, and from the moment he arrived, he was surrounded by love. Jack and the ranch hands became surrogate uncles, teaching Thomas to walk among the horses and showing him the ways of ranch life as he grew. Adelaide reduced her cooking duties, hiring a helper from town so she could spend more time with her son, but she still oversaw the kitchen and made special meals for the men who had become her family. 2 years later, a daughter arrived. They named her Evelyn, after Adelaide's mother, another act of reclamation and healing. Evelyn had her mother's dark hair and her father's gentle spirit, and she wrapped everyone around her tiny finger from day one. The cabin expanded again, with Zachary and the men building additional rooms. What had started as a small structure became a proper family home, filled with laughter and love and the beautiful chaos of children growing. As Thomas and Evelyn grew, Adelaide and Zachary told them the story of how they met, age-appropriate versions that emphasized the themes of courage and kindness. They taught their children that everyone deserves dignity and respect, that shame should never stop you from seeking help or community, and that sometimes the greatest acts of love are the simplest gestures of acceptance. Thomas grew into a fine young man, taking after his father in his sense of honor and responsibility. He learned the cowboy trade and eventually took a position as foreman on a neighboring ranch. Evelyn inherited her mother's skill in the kitchen and her father's way with horses, a unique combination that served her well. She eventually married a kind young rancher and moved to a property nearby, close enough for regular visits. Adelaide and Zachary grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. The passion of youth mellowed into something richer and more stable, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared history, and unwavering commitment. They supported each other through difficulties and celebrated each other's joys. When illness struck or hard times came, they faced it together, drawing strength from their bond. Jack retired eventually, and Zachary became the foreman of the Double R. He ran the ranch with the same fairness and dedication that Jack had shown, and under his leadership, the ranch prospered. Adelaide's reputation as a cook spread, and people would travel from neighboring ranches just to taste her famous biscuits or pies. They returned to Red River regularly, attending church services and becoming respected members of the community. Adelaide sometimes thought about that young woman who had stood at the base of the church steps, too ashamed to enter, and felt a deep compassion for her. That girl had been so lost, so convinced of her own unworthiness. Adelaide wished she could go back and tell her that everything would be all right, that shame was temporary but courage and love were lasting. On Sunday mornings, Adelaide and Zachary often arrived early to church. They would stand at the base of the steps, watching people arrive, and if they ever saw someone hesitating, someone who looked lost or ashamed or unsure of their welcome, they would approach. "Walk in with me," Zachary would say, offering his arm, echoing the words that had changed both their lives so many years ago. And Adelaide would smile and take the person's other arm, and together they would walk up those steps and through those doors, showing by example that everyone deserves grace, that everyone deserves a second chance, that love and acceptance can heal even the deepest wounds. As they entered their later years, Zachary and Adelaide often sat on the porch of their home in the evenings, watching the sun set over the land they loved. Their children were grown with families of their own. The ranch continued to thrive. Their life together had been full and rich, marked by hard work and deep love. "You ever regret it?" Adelaide asked one evening, her hand in Zachary's as they rocked gently in their chairs, taking a chance on a broken girl outside a church. Zachary turned to look at her, his eyes still that same beautiful green-brown, though now framed by lines that spoke of years of laughter and hard work. "You were never broken," he said firmly. "You were wounded, grieving, ashamed through no fault of your own, but you were never broken. And marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose beyond just existing. You taught me that love can heal, that grace is real, that new beginnings are always possible." Adelaide leaned over and kissed him, a gentle kiss full of decades of affection. "You saved me," she said softly. "We saved each other," Zachary corrected. "That is what love does. It does not rescue its partners. It does not fix, it accepts. We found each other when we both needed someone who understood shame and loss and the desire for redemption. We built this life together, brick by brick, day by day. That is not saving, that is choosing every single day to love and be loved." As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in those familiar shades of orange and purple, Adelaide rested her head on Zachary's shoulder. She thought about that July morning in 1878 when she had stood at the base of church steps, convinced she had nothing left to offer the world. She thought about the tall cowboy who had seen her, really seen her, and offered his hand. That simple act of kindness had changed everything. It had given her the courage to walk through those doors, to start building a new life, to believe in her own worth again. And from that one moment of grace had flowed decades of love, family, purpose, and joy. Thomas came to visit the following week, bringing his wife and their 3 children. Evelyn rode over from her ranch with her husband and their 2 daughters. The house filled with noise and laughter, with grandchildren demanding stories and attention, with the bustle of family life. Adelaide cooked a huge meal, her hands still steady and sure in the kitchen, even in her 60s. Zachary carved the roast and told stories that made the children giggle and the adults roll their eyes affectionately. They ate together around the large table Zachary had built years ago, 3 generations breaking bread and sharing love. After dinner, the adults sat on the porch while the children played in the yard under the watchful eye of their parents. Evelyn sat beside her mother, her own hands busy with mending. "Mama, tell the story again," she requested, "about how you and Papa met." Adelaide smiled, glancing at Zachary, who nodded encouragingly. She had told this story dozens of times, but it never got old. "I was standing outside the church in Red River," Adelaide began, her voice taking on the cadence of a familiar tale. I wanted to go inside to pray to find some peace after my father died, but I was too ashamed. I thought everyone would judge me, would see me as unworthy. I stood at the bottom of those steps for a long time, too afraid to climb them. And then Papa came, Thomas prompted, even though he knew every word. And then your father came, Adelaide confirmed, her eyes finding Zachary's across the porch. He saw me standing there, saw my fear and shame, and instead of walking past, instead of judging, he stopped and talked to me. He told me about his own father, his own shame. He showed me that I was not alone, that I was not defined by my father's mistakes. And then he said the magic words, Evelyn added with a smile. And then he said, "Walk in with me," Adelaide continued. 3 simple words that changed my life. He offered me his arm and we walked into that church together. He stood by me when people stared. He introduced me to possibilities I had not imagined. He gave me a job and then he gave me his heart. You gave me yours too, Zachary interjected softly. Do not sell yourself short in this story, Adelaide. You had every reason to give up, to run away, to let bitterness consume you. But you chose courage. You chose to try again. You chose to build a new life with hard work and determination. I might have opened a door, but you walked through it with your head held high. The grandchildren, drawn by the adults' voices, gathered around to listen. The oldest, Thomas's son Jacob, who was 10, asked, "Grandpa, were you scared when you saw Grandma?" Zachary considered the question seriously. I was not scared exactly, but I was moved. I saw someone who needed help, and I remembered when I needed help. I remembered how it felt to be alone and ashamed, and I knew I had to do something, even if it was just a small gesture. I did not know she would become my wife, that we would build all this together. I just knew I could not walk past her. That is called compassion, Adelaide told the children. It is when you see someone suffering and you choose to help, even when it is inconvenient or difficult. Your grandfather showed me compassion that day, and it made all the difference. And love, little Sarah, Evelyn's youngest, piped up. He showed you love. Eventually, yes, Adelaide agreed with a warm smile. The compassion came first and the love grew from there. We got to know each other, we worked together, we talked and laughed and built trust. And somewhere along the way, compassion became friendship and friendship became love. As the evening deepened and the children were rounded up for bedtime, Adelaide and Zachary found themselves alone again on the porch. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky in glittering abundance. "You think we have done all right?" Adelaide asked quietly. "With our lives, with our children. You think we broke the cycles of shame and pain that we inherited?" Zachary reached over and took her hand. "I think we have done better than all right. Look at our children, Adelaide. Thomas is a good man, honest and hardworking, with a family he adores. Evelyn is strong and capable, with a husband who treats her as an equal partner. Our grandchildren are growing up knowing they are loved, knowing they have worth, knowing that mistakes do not define them. We have built something good here, something lasting." "We have," Adelaide agreed, squeezing his hand. "We really have." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through grass, the hoot of an owl. "I have been thinking," Zachary said eventually, "about that church, those steps where we met. I would like to donate some money to have them repaired. They are getting old and worn, and I think it would be fitting, a way of honoring where our story began." "That is a wonderful idea," Adelaide said warmly. "Maybe we could have a small plaque installed, something simple, not about us specifically, but about welcome and grace." "What would it say?" Zachary asked. Adelaide thought for a moment. "How about all are welcome here, walk in with courage?" "Perfect," Zachary agreed. "Simple and true. That is exactly right. In the spring of 1911, over 30 years after that fateful Sunday morning, a small dedication ceremony was held at the church in Red River. The steps had been repaired and reinforced, and a modest bronze plaque had been installed beside the door. It read, just as Adelaide had suggested, "All are welcome here. Walk in with courage." Zachary and Adelaide stood with their children and grandchildren, now including great-grandchildren, the youngest of whom was just a baby in Evelyn's daughter's arms. Reverend Daniels had long since retired, but the new young reverend spoke movingly about the importance of grace and welcome, about how sometimes the simplest acts of kindness could change lives. After the ceremony, people came up to thank Adelaide and Zachary for their generosity. Many knew their story, had heard versions of it over the years. Some shared their own stories of times when someone had shown them unexpected kindness, had helped them through dark moments. Mrs. Patterson, now ancient but still sharp, took Adelaide's hand. "You have been a blessing to this community," she said. "Both of you. You have shown us what it means to rise above circumstances, to build something beautiful from pain. Thank you for that example." As they prepared to leave, Adelaide found herself standing at the base of those steps one more time. She looked up at the church doors, remembering that girl she had been, so lost and ashamed. She felt a wave of affection for that younger self, no longer pity or regret but simple compassion. Zachary came to stand beside her, his arm going around her waist. "Thinking about old times." "Thinking about how far we have come," Adelaide replied. "How much life we have lived since that morning." "It has been a good life," Zachary said contentedly. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. The best," Adelaide agreed. They walked up the steps together, their hands intertwined, and through the doors of the church. The building was cool and peaceful, light streaming through the windows in colored beams. They sat in the same pew where they had sat that first day, and Adelaide closed her eyes, offering a prayer of gratitude for the unexpected blessings that had flowed from one simple act of kindness. As the years continued to pass, Adelaide and Zachary aged gracefully, their bodies slowing but their minds and hearts still sharp and full of love. They celebrated their 40th anniversary with a large party at the ranch, surrounded by what seemed like half the county. People came from near and far to honor the couple who had become local legends, not for any grand accomplishment, but simply for living well and loving deeply. On a warm summer evening in 1918, as the world beyond their corner of New Mexico was consumed with war and change, Adelaide and Zachary sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Adelaide was 72 now, Zachary 75. Their hair was white, their faces deeply lined, but their eyes still held the same light, the same love that had drawn them together 4 decades before. "I am tired," Adelaide said softly, her head on Zachary's shoulder. "But it is a good tired, the tired of a life well lived." "I know what you mean," Zachary replied, his arm around her. "I am ready when the time comes to rest, but I am grateful for every day we have had." "No regrets?" Adelaide asked. "Not a single one," Zachary said firmly. "Every choice, every hardship, every joy, it all led to this, to us. To the life we built. I would not change a thing." "Me neither," Adelaide whispered. They sat together as the sun set one more time, painting the sky in those familiar, beautiful colors. The land stretched out before them, constant and enduring. The ranch was in good hands, passed to Thomas, who ran it with the same integrity his father had shown. Their children and grandchildren were thriving, carrying forward the lessons of courage and grace they had learned. As darkness fell and stars emerged, Adelaide and Zachary went inside to their bedroom. They had shared this room for nearly 40 years, had laughed and cried and loved within these walls. They climbed into bed together, Adelaide curling into Zachary's side as she had done countless times before. "I love you," she said, as she had said every night of their marriage. "I love you," Zachary replied as he had replied every night. "Today, tomorrow, and forever." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and in the morning, when the sun rose over the ranch, they were still there, still together. Zachary had passed peacefully in the night, his arms around his beloved wife. Adelaide, who had always said she did not want to outlive him, followed him just hours later, as if her heart knew it was time to go as well. Their children grieved, as did their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and all the people whose lives they had touched over the years. But the grief was tempered with gratitude and peace, because it was clear that Adelaide and Zachary Grantham had lived exactly the kind of life they had hoped to live. They had loved well, raised their children with care, built a legacy of kindness and grace. They were buried side by side in the Red River Cemetery, under a simple stone that read, "Adelaide and Zachary Grantham, beloved parents, grandparents, and friends, they walked together in courage and love." At the funeral, Thomas stood before the gathered crowd and told the story one more time. The story of a grieving girl too ashamed to enter a church, and a cowboy who saw her and said, "Walk in with me." He told how that simple act of compassion had blossomed into a love story that spanned 4 decades, that had produced a family and a legacy that would continue for generations. "My parents taught us that shame is not permanent," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "They taught us that grace is always available if we are brave enough to accept it. They taught us that love, real lasting love, is built on respect and partnership and the daily choice to show up for each other. And they taught us that sometimes the most important thing we can do is to see someone who is struggling and offer them our hand." As the years passed, and the 20th century unfolded with all its changes and challenges, the story of Adelaide and Zachary Grantham became a treasured part of Red River's history. The plaque they had installed at the church remained, a quiet reminder of welcome and grace. Their descendants continued to live in New Mexico, carrying forward the values they had embodied. The cabin where they had lived expanded again over the generations, but the core of it remained, preserved as a reminder of where it all began. On the wall inside hung the simple wildflowers Zachary had picked for Adelaide, pressed and framed, still holding their color after all these years. And sometimes, on quiet Sunday mornings, people standing at the base of those church steps, hesitating for whatever reason, would feel a gentle presence, a warmth that gave them courage. They would square their shoulders, lift their heads, and walk through those doors, perhaps carrying an echo of that long-ago moment when a cowboy had offered his hand to a grieving girl and said the simple words that changed everything. "Walk in with me." 3 small words that became a lifetime of love. A simple gesture of kindness that rippled out across decades, touching countless lives. A story of redemption and grace that proved that our worst moments do not define us, that shame can be overcome, that love can heal even the deepest wounds. Adelaide Morgan had stood at the bottom of those church steps, convinced she had nothing left to offer the world. Zachary Grantham had seen her, really seen her, and offered her not pity but partnership, not rescue but respect. Together, they had walked through those doors and into a life richer and fuller than either could have imagined. Their story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues. It was a story of daily choice, of consistent love, of 2 wounded people who decided to heal together rather than alone. It was a story that showed that sometimes the most profound changes come from the simplest acts, that courage is contagious, and that love, true love, is always worth choosing. And in the end, that was their legacy. Not wealth or fame or power, but the simple truth that kindness matters, that everyone deserves dignity, that grace is real, and that love, when nurtured with care and commitment, can last a lifetime and beyond. As the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, over the ranch where Adelaide and Zachary had built their life, over the church where their story began, their great-great-grandchildren played in the yard, laughing and free, carrying forward into the future the legacy of courage and love that had begun with 3 simple words on a summer morning so long ago. Walk in with me.